Well, down in Miami on 2nd Avenue, and the boys are showing what they can do with that killer kid. Hey, baby, this is the K2 brother mode. So bounce that sucker across that floor, trying to learn how to do that. Do that doggone killer kid. Yeah, like your mama did. Kid in the country don't cost a dime. Anytime that's a $40 fine. I'll pay, I wanna do that killer kid. Up on Dago Hill. Little mama got a whiskey still. She sells me all kinds of stuff. Come on, little baby, fix up that body. We gonna get high and drunk. Everybody gonna do that, yeah. Do that doggone kid. Dodge him all, you better dodge your ball. Get out of town. Dodge that Johnson law. You gonna do that kid. Baby, you can jump on a running board. Don't freak out, mama. It's your mind. You riding on Cadillacs, well, the girl my grandma says she wanna do it. Take your time. Learn to fly through that killer kid. Kill it in the country, don't cost you a dime. Time that's a $40 fine. Ah, yeah, that killer kid. Little mama got a Cadillac and daddy got a Buick. Sister got me and that gal wanna do a rock car. I know you're old, get up in years, ain't you, baby? The shit really just take your time. Learn to fly, do that, killer kid. Kill it in the country, don't cost you a dime. In town, that's a $40 fine. Do that, killer kid. I'm Todd Albright, and I remember when I was, I must have been 16, I was at the public library, and I came across a vinyl LP of Dave Van Ronk's, or Inside Dave Van Ronk was the title of it, and up until that point, I was listening to anything that was finger-picked. I didn't care what it was. There was something about a finger-picking guitar, a finger-style played guitar that just resonated with me more than anything else I'd ever heard. I didn't care whether it was, Gordon Lightfoot or Jim. It didn't matter who it was. If it was something about the sound. It wasn't necessarily the music itself. It was just hearing that sound. And I came across this Inside Dave Van Ronk record at the public library. And, you flip it over and you're reading songs like Samson and Delilah and the Cocaine Blues and all this in it. I was like, well, we're gonna take this home and see what this is about. So, you take the record home and I'm flipping it over and I'm looking and there's, the Cocaine Blues, there's Hang Me, Oh Hang. I mean, all very intriguing sounding songs to a 15, 16-year-old, whatever I was at the time. And it's happened to me twice now. I mean, I took that thing home on the strength of the cover. There's this guy leaning up against what appeared to be a barroom door with a cat. And I thought, well, I got to take this, And it happened again, not shortly after that, I ran into an album by Paul Jeremiah called The Gamblin' Woman Blues. And there was this incredible cover with this guy. It was a painting of a guy playing a 12-string, and there's a deck of cards like shooting out of the sound hole, and it was incredible. And on the back you're reading songs like Skin Game Blues and Cocaine Princess, and I mean all these incredible songs. And I was like, well, I'm taking that one home too. I got to have that. So I bought that record and I took it home, and it blew my mind because there's this guy playing this fingerstyle blues, it was also that time I was, there was a big resurgence in reissues on compact disc of like the Roots and Blues series by Columbia and Document Records, and all these great things were suddenly showing up in the local record stores, or the CD shop rather, and you just bought everything you could. Next thing you know, I've got the best of Blind Lemon Jefferson. You're into Blind Willie Johnson. You're into, and it just goes on and on and on. But it was the sound of the guitar that really did it. That was the most important thing. My interest in the 12-string guitar kind of dates back to purchasing a Leadbelly record. It was kind of like a best of Leadbelly, and I had at that time come across a piece of junk 12-string guitar. It was a shorter scaled guitar, and it wasn't really meant to be tuned low. But I had no concept of that anyway. I just knew that listening to this Leadbelly record that I know he's playing a G chord, but for some reason my guitar doesn't sound like that. And it was a long time. Actually, what happened was I was restringing this 12-string guitar, and I was listening to that Paul Jeremiah Gamblin' Woman Blues record, and the song Peg Leg Howl song, the Skin Game Blues, came on, and Paul's got his guitar. It's in vestibule tuning, but it's tuned down to B flat. And as I was stringing my guitar, I accidentally came into pitch with the recording, and it was a eureka moment in my 15-year-old mind. I couldn't believe what was going on, and it was a real revelation. So I'd always had, but I never took the 12-string as being the end-all, be-all, but I always played it, and I was always more drawn to it. And as the years went on, I noticed playing live that I would take the 12-string and the 6-string to the shows, but I'd end up playing the 12-string more and more, to the point where it's like, well, I don't really need to bring the 6-string at all, and then you just eventually just end up playing the 12-string all the time. Once you get the 12-string illness, we'll call it an illness, there's really no going back, because now playing a 6-string just seems kind of empty to me. Said I'm leaving my world. Lord, I don't know where to go. When I'm leaving my world, Lord, I don't know where to go. Woman I've been in love with for 20 years, baby. Lord, she can't use me no more. Holes in my pockets, baby. I got patches all on my pants. Got holes in my pockets, mama. I got patches on my pants. I'm behind in my house, baby. Landlord puts it all in advance. Grasshoppers in my pillow, baby. I can drink it's all in my meal. Grasshoppers in my pillow, mama. I got drinkers on my meal. I got a jack in my shoe, baby. Lord, it's sticking in my Rather see my coffin coming, baby. Lordy, Lordy, my back door. Rather see my coffin coming, my love. Lordy, Lordy, my back door. Have a good looking woman tell me to my face, Lordy, she can't use me no more. And I feel like walking, baby. Lord, I feel like lying down. Well, I feel like walking my mud. Lord, I feel like lying down. Have a good looking woman tell me to my face, Lord, is she gonna throw me down? And I'm leaving my room. The 12-string guitar kind of has an odd history. We think folks have speculated it came from Mexico. Mexico had a history of double-stringed instruments with choruses on it, and so did Italy. The Italians had a lot of multi-stringed instruments also. The thing about them was that they're actually baritone instruments. They have long scales, so they're intended from nut to saddle here. We're talking 26.5 to 27 inches, somewhere around there, which allows you the ability to put heavier gauge strings on the guitar and tune it low. Somewhere in the 60s, I don't know if we can lay the blame of this directly in Pete Seeger's lap or not, but folks began cranking up the tuning to, D, or even in some cases concert pitch, or even capoing up to concert pitch for whatever reason. And a lot of guitars just kind of exploded over time just from the tension on the neck and the body. But they're not meant to be tuned high or to concert pitch. They're baritone instruments. The ones from the 20s by makers like Oscar Schmidt, who made Stella, and Lyon and Healy, and Washburn, folks like that were making these guitars. And the other aspect of them that gives them the sound that they have when you hear Leadbelly, who played a Stella, is that they have ladder bracing as opposed to like X bracing. These are laterally braced, and ladder braced guitars just have a different sound. And these guys they only made these guitars between late 1890s to about 1938-39 is kind of when they pretty much disappeared. And then they had a kind of a resurgence after Pete Seeger and the Weavers came through in the late 50s, early 60s, but those were completely different guitars. They had shorter scales, and they were X-braced, and the tuning was cranked very high, up to concert pitch a lot of times. 12-string guitar players of the past, the present, that folks might be interested that don't know would be guys like Leadbelly, Blind Willie McTell, Seth Richards. Seth Richards and George Carter are a little obscure, but they didn't have a huge output, but the things they did are important. Contemporarily, the guy that showed me how to do this really and truly is Paul Jeremiah, and hounded Paul for years. Anytime I needed, and he was always very free with the information. I could always call him on the phone and say, hey, how do you do this, or what's the tuning for that, and you do this and such, and he begrudgingly sometimes, but most of the time he was pretty good with it. He would offer me, it was kind of, he was very free with the information. I know a lot of guys historically were kind of secretive about their techniques, but Paul was always, with me anyway, he was always very open, and still is today. As far as the actual instruments themselves with past builders. We spoke about early on the builders like Oscar Schmidt, they were pumping out guitars in factories in New Jersey, and a lot of these folks were Italian immigrants who were building instruments like 12 strings and 10 string guitars, 11 string guitars, just multi-coursed instruments. For years, they came to America. They started working in these shops in New York City and New Jersey and Chicago. And there are folks like Lyon and Healy. The issue is that you would have one builder who would sell these guitars to a bunch of different furniture stores, and the furniture stores would slap their own label on it. So it would be made by Oscar Schmidt, but it would have a different name brand on it. Like Regal in Chicago sold guitars to a company called Tonk Brothers. It's just how it was. Contemporarily, I play guitars made by a friend of mine in Madison, Wisconsin, by the name of Todd Cambio. He has a company called Fralini Guitars, and Todd makes these guitars exactly as they were made in the 20s and the 30s by people like Oscar Schmidt and Regal. The guitar in my lap here is a copy of a Regal guitar that was marketed as a Tonk Brothers guitar. There's one photograph of Blind Willie McTell playing one of these guitars, and the only example of this guitar that we know about belonged to Paul Jeremiah, who then sold it to Todd Cambio, and then we made copies. And once you're stuck with it, I've heard Leo Kottke make similar claims that if you unfortunately get stuck with an affliction of 12 string, you're pretty well cooked. Your ways I just can't stand. Your ways I can't stand. You're taking all of my love and into another man. I'm going back to Savannah, Mama. Right my distance down. Good is your Georgia Railroad, sure don't won't be right. I love you, baby, but you just don't treat me right.